Welcome everybody. Thank you for having us here today. We're going to talk about blockchain for smart contracts today. We've got, I think, a good panel here. So I'll start with just asking everyone to do a little introduction.
Yeah, hi everybody. Can you hear me? This is operational. Okay. So I'm Wulf Kaal. I am my main job is I run Smarter Research Institute, which is a research institute dedicated to conceptualizing new protocols for the emerging decentralized economy. And my day job currently still is I'm a law professor.
Excellent. So I'm T.O'Kelly. I'm the agency CIO for financial and professional regulation at the state of Illinois. Our agency is responsible for regulating all the state banks and credit unions, currency exchanges, consumer credit organizations, money transmission. So particularly in the financial services space, financial regulation, we get pulled into a lot of the conversation around blockchain, obviously because of crypto and lending and payments and money transmission. So it's a pleasure to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Hello everyone, Philip Fornaro. I'm an attorney in the space since 2016. We've dealt on the crypto side. We went through the ICO struggles, the litigation, the cease and desist letters. Now we're back to use cases again, and everyone's a little bit more happy than they were 7 months ago. We do a lot with the crypto space. We present a lot and go all around. So if you have any questions, we're hopefully get you some education today. That's our main goal in the space at this point.
Hi, I'm John Mirkovic, Deputy Recorder of Deeds for the Cook County Recorder of Deeds Office, in charge of communications and IT there. Back in 2016, we were the first county government in the United States to endorse blockchain technology and launch an actual study of how it could be used in the real estate space. And under the leadership of Karen Yarbrough, who was recently elected as the first African American and female county clerk in Cook County on Tuesday. And as some of you know, the recorder's office will be merged into that office over the next year. So she will inherit back the recorder's office. At that time, will be one of the largest records repositories in the world. Birth, death, marriage, voting, and land records. So really all your vital records, and securing data has been one of her top priorities, and exploring new technologies. And so we've been studying this space for about 2.5 years now.
Yeah, just to interject, I've been in the Cook County for 22 years, and Cook County was never first in anything. And that was awesome. When I saw it, I actually pulled up the Recorders of Deeds Office website in 2016, and I was going to show my buddy how we could transform Cook County through the blockchain. And sure enough, it said blockchain. It was a beta being done by Cook County, probably you at the time. So yeah. That's awesome. That's a pretty cool thing.
Great. So we're going to focus the conversation a little bit today on smart contracts, particularly, and so I want to start with just a conversation around what's everybody doing currently. We'll get to what you're looking at down the road in a little bit, but maybe we'll start with John, and maybe you can talk about what is Cook County looking at currently, particularly around smart contracts?
Yeah, so since I got in this, my ultimate vision has been, sort of a smart contract that settles a real estate transaction. So right now it's settled, I don't know, I guess you could call it a dumb contract. 25 to 30 people all argue and email things around to each other and pay each other and lose money, and but they ultimately get it done, right? So part of my vision has been, creating a escrow and settlement master contract where, not only do people know what is happening in real estate, that the transaction could ultimately just be settled in minutes, once the fact finding is done. So that's going to require some changes to state law. Namely, the biggest one is that you cannot even go into my office now and know for sure who even owns a property. That's because we went off of what was called the Torrens system in '92, which is really a government registry of property. So, it's kind of like your car. If your name's not on my car title, you can't pretend like you own my car. But right now, you can mail a piece of paper in to my office and forge it up and steal your neighbor's house if you want. It's really easy to do, and wouldn't recommend anyone do that. But real estate records really are in major need of reform. You know, some people ask, why can't my home's title be protected by a password? And that's the perfect question, right? Right now, like I said, the buyer doesn't even need to sign the deed on a property, so you could deed, you know, a junky property to Jamie Dimon if you wanted to, if you had a beef with him. So, you know, some of the things we're doing is we're putting in a new land record system, and we're going to use hashing technology to, you know, make it so you can certify the state of a chain of title into a blockchain at any time. So really, when you're doing business, you go and look on the website and see what's there at a certain time. You know, 2 weeks later, something new could appear there, like a lien or something from a municipality. And if you'd already taken business action, you know, now you've got to prove that it wasn't there when you were doing that. So, you know, we're going to have that soon, and we're going to. I don't know if any other recorders in the country are certifying digital files instead of paper, but we're going to be launching that within the next month. Where right now, if you need a certified copy of your deed, you have to either come into our office and walk out with a piece of paper that has an embosser, you know, a imprint on it. But we're going to use hashing technology to allow you to get that file immediately, you know, watermarked with the hash of the underlying file in our database, with an ability to go on our website and prove back that it did indeed come from us. So that's way more secure than a piece of paper that somebody could put some whiteout on and change some numbers around and walk it into court. And you know, as Karen Yarborough moves to the clerk's office, we're going to be looking at blockchain for, you know, certifying marriage licenses. And you know, I know it's scary to say, and people are afraid of voting and blockchain, but you know, a county in West Virginia did it with overseas military. So you know, we want to look at that too. And you know, blockchain is essentially a voting system at its heart. So we were interested in that as well. So that's what we've been up to.
That's great.
I'm not afraid of voting on the blockchain. It can't be too much worse than it is now. So basically, what I want to pattern on what he just said. The real estate industry, as it relates to residential, commercial is actually a lot better. Residential is an utter disaster. There are too many people involved. So the blockchain is a perfect solution. But what we're looking at here is that the two major components to that are three major components are cooperation, which ironically, as it relates to a blockchain, is decentralized and distributed, right? So, but we've got, in order to do the residential with the blockchain, we need to get the title companies online. We need to get the recorders of deeds online, which sounds like they're getting there quicker than anybody. And then, you know, thirdly, the banks have to get online. You have to, you know, trust this new system. And then, you know, fourth, obviously, is, I said three, but four is the you know, the government, that they don't interfere too much with this technology. So that's sort of where but also help the technology along. And that's what, generally speaking, when I went to DC a couple weeks ago, we actually it was a month ago now, I talked to a bunch of the congressmen, you know, their staffers and the CFTC and the SEC, and they're really embracing this. I talked to someone from the OCC the other day at a conference I spoke at, and they really are helping. And obviously, you know, our friend here, Sean, is working hard from his perspective too to get to this point. So that all has to come together. But that doesn't mean that we can't do this on a private side. So we're talking about either public blockchain or private blockchain or permission blockchain. So even though we all love the concept of distributed, you know, and decentralized, a lot of the stuff has to start at a centralized location in order for us to get to those points. So the smart contract in itself, as it relates to what we're doing, is that we're not quite ready yet. I started building a smart contract with a developer I knew regarding arbitration. I'll talk about it later, on how to deal with disputes as it relate to smart contracts. And what it came down to is that just not ready yet. The current technology that we have is sufficient to support what we need to do. You know, just getting off of paper, going to straight to smart contract, we probably can do the same thing with Box and some encryption and a nice practice management software. So.
How about from your perspective, Wulf? Smart
Yeah,
contracts.
so Phil mentioned it, we're just not ready, right? So this space needs a lot of infrastructure development. And so that's what the Moderator Research Institute is here for. Our basic recognition that The space just isn't ready. I mean, there are several people in the room that I know are struggling with this right now. The space isn't ready. So what is needed? So we identify 4 major protocols that are needed in the space right now. One is stability. You cannot build a decentralized economy if you deal with the level of volatility that we're dealing with in this space. Impossible. Nobody will buy into it. Your grandmother will never use cryptocurrencies if she can't pay her bread next week because it dropped 5 times below, right? There's no way. So there's some free marketeers, perhaps some in the room, who are arguing, no, the markets will take care of it. Well, they won't. And they won't, even if they could, they wouldn't do it in time. So there's a core recognition that we need stability mechanisms in this space. This is a little bit fancy right now in the space, in the sense that there's over 35 stability coins right now. Some call them stable coins. Some people think it's a bad word. We like to call it a native low volatility coin, but that's needed. There's no way around it. The research on this, so we are all professors, full-time academics. The research on this is limited, to say, to be careful how we talk about this, but there's very limited research. So there's one paper, Robert Sams, 2014, who started it. It's a great start. We commend him for it. We needed it. Then there's of course Tether. Tether has major problems, as many of you will know. Not passing audits. There's all kinds of problems. Some people are arguing that they're basically on their way out already. And now that we have basis. So the question on stability mechanisms always revolves around, do you peg it against a hard asset, an existing currency, or do you do it algorithmically? We believe that you have to do a combination of that. So that's a major mathematical model that's coming out. We have almost 10 people working on this right now around the world. So Japan, Europe, here, a couple of other. And then so that's stability. The next item that's really important is liquidity. This space, many of you in the room, to the extent that you own cryptocurrency, Melvin and I just had a long conversation about this, you are basically frozen out of the market. Depends a little bit on what you're holding, but you can't get out of the market, right? There's a lot of folks who really, half a year ago, big reports, people lost 70% of their net worth because they overextended themselves in crypto, right? So liquidity is one of the core items that has to be fixed. We're working on a major initiative in this context that I can't talk about too much at this point, but it also has to be solved at the protocol level. Next one is utility. There's not going to be a lot of people in the room who can answer, what can you actually do with a blockchain, with a public blockchain? There's a lot of hype that people have talked about. There are no fully functional enterprise level public blockchain solutions around. What do you do with an EOS? A lot of people are hyped up about it, and we love EOS. Please don't get me wrong. They are leading the charge, if you want. But getting it to the next level necessitates dealing with those problems. So stability, liquidity, utility, and most importantly, governance. Now that governance means intra-blockchain governance. It doesn't mean using top-down centralized structures to be imposed on top of decentralized solutions, right? That doesn't work, that can't work. So there's a core insight, a core protocol level that some other research institute is working on, fixing blockchain governance. So that means that in our estimation, that it has to be an evolutionary system. So this is still Harvard folks talking about socially optimal hard forking. That's 2 years ago, basically. So if people still talk about hard forking, that's not the way forward, right? So we have to get to the next level. And so I could go on, sorry, I'd stop here.
No, that's okay. One point I would add, based on top of what everyone's talked about here, from my perspective, is just a very practical, like, application development perspective is, as I've been exploring this space and going a little bit deeper, when you actually get in, I mean, how many folks in here have actually coded with Solidity, actually jumped in and did it? Just a couple. If you get in there and you're actually coding in there, I mean, if you're familiar with object-oriented programming, picking it up isn't that difficult, but it's fairly straightforward. But still, nonetheless, you're coding applications essentially from scratch in the way that you would have done it 20 years ago. So even to be able to mass sort of like scale up the use of and the adoption of smart contracts, just from a very practical perspective, it very much feels like we're going to need to get to a place where there's reusable components in order to do that. Coding these things from scratch is probably going to take quite a bit of time in order to really get to that sort of greater level of scale and adoption. So just a thought there.
You know, we don't know exactly if everyone knows what a smart contract is. Should we explain that real quickly?
No, great point. Go for it.
I'd like for the professor to do it because he probably can do it better than anyone here, based on his first go around.
So,
Or did I put you on the spot?
No. I'm teaching coding for lawyers, so I'm happy to do it, and that's all
Perfect.
we do. I mean, we focus on what legal solutions can you implement with Solidity. Of course, as things move on, we have to find other coding languages, and to get to the next level, that's, you know, I really care about that. So, what can a smart contract do? What's the power of a smart contract? So everybody in the room has signed some sort of contractual agreement. So we have a paper that sets out certain terms in natural language, and you sign it with ink, and you're bound by the contractual provisions. So a smart contract is, in essence, it's slightly a misnomer calling it a contract, but it's not natural language. It's coded parameters that dictate legal outcomes. Yeah. So the basic smart contract that everybody knows is John sends me 1 Bitcoin or less. So can John do that? Well, John can do it if the parameters of the smart contract are fulfilled. That means he has to prove that there's a deposit in his wallet of 1 Bitcoin. I have to be able to receive it with my wallet, and so once those parameters are fulfilled, and we can add other parameters on top of it, nobody can now change the fulfillment of the contract. It's automated. Once you sign off on it and you agree to do it, there are no hindrances, right? And so a lot of people get very excited about this, because if it's pre-coded, preordained by code, all the legal problems that we as lawyers are dealing with in contracting arguably no longer apply. Contract enforcement is not an issue. Transaction costs are radically minimized because it's standardized and automated. Yeah? And so, so I could go on. So that's the basic concept. Yeah?
So what I'd like, in order to further define that, I wonder if we could go back to what you guys were talking about earlier, and because you were talking about real estate transactions, right? So there's lots of I think, points along the way in a real estate transaction where one or multiple smart contracts could come into play. So maybe let's use that as an example, a very tangible example on how to just better define smart contracts.
Yeah, so anything related to an escrow. So this is what our title companies act as now. They take in the documents, they take in the money, they send it to the recorders, they deal with the bank, they deal with the seller, the buyer, whoever else, third party that's involved, a contractor that didn't get paid. But it's an utter disaster, so that it's the title company and the emails, as John was saying, it just becomes a big mess. So going into a transaction for $30,000 is probably far more complicated than one that's $2.5 million. So acting as an escrow, having some sort of multi-sig wallet where the money can come in and everything can be set up. It's almost like an escrow instruction. You give the title company instructions what to do. You have to take these documents in from the lender. You got to get certain ones signed, sent back. But it's all, we don't even use the very basic technologies that we have now. We don't all need to be in a room, people, texting and emailing and looking around. So if we have a centralized location like an escrow through some sort of smart contract with all 4 of us have to agree, and we all have to authorize the transaction through the smart contract. Everything gets distributed, and no one really has to be there. There doesn't have to be fighting about, what color the curtains were, who stole the sump pump. All that's outside of the transaction. The base transaction results in ultimate efficiency, and I think that's the first place we start as it relates to a smart contract in the world of real estate.
And so the idea there, just to even make it more concrete, is when you have your escrow funds, right, or your earnest money, if certain criteria are met, the money distributes in one direction or the other, and there's not this sort of argument over that money, right? And that's where you can run into friction in real estate transactions.
That's a great point. Yeah. It's perfectly said.
Yeah, a smart contract that makes sense for real estate is, one. So imagine my office. Pick the 5 biggest banks in Cook County. They're all settling mortgages between each other every day, right? So Bank of America, Wells Fargo, they're taking, they're lending money and they're paying off another bank, right? So one that makes sense is just simply a mortgage settlement contract. And Wulf mentioned a stable coin. You could actually put a stable coin within government that, it isn't traded on any exchange, so you never have to worry about whether it's 99.8 cents today. So it's just a 1-for-1. So you take advantage of the actual, what makes sense about crypto is that it can move money and value around without having to go through, the wiring system and have to be audited as it comes in and compared against another table. So all the banks, let's say they send in $5 million the first month, and all they're doing is sending money in each month. If 1 month is light for one bank, they may have to send in a little money the next month, and if they didn't do enough business, it's still there. So that's a shared ledger that all the banks could use to settle money, and it would really lower expenses in auditing and compliance. And you could pay the government all its fees. You could pay the realtors, the real estate lawyers, all out of a smart contract that, once everyone every party has signed the contract, the last step is just, send the money where it needs to go. And, to me, that's a smart contract that makes sense for real estate.
I only have one objection. What he said is probably under the system, the attorneys are gone at that point in terms of how it does. It's going to affect the way we do business, and that's probably why we're moving so slow, which is my opinion, is because real estate, attorneys, brokers, when everything becomes more efficient, there's less need for them in that industry, and we'll disperse out.
Right. That's the big problem with the hype in crypto, where everybody's saying, oh, no, the code will take care of it. We anticipate it, we automate it, and we lower the transaction costs, right? So there's a huge problem with smart contracts. And one is that it doesn't conform with human behavior, because you cannot anticipate on all eventualities in coding something. And the code that we have has bugs. So I teach coding for lawyers. I guarantee you, if I spend half a year on 150 lines of code, there are still bugs in there of unanticipated consequences that I never understood in a given environment. And that means, and we haven't found a way to automate it. There's some people saying, oh, machines will automate the code and will fix the bugs. We're not nearly there, right? That's 10 years or more down the line. So that means we have to have some sort of, and by the way, this is all Samata what I'm talking about, right? This is core insight in protocol levels. You have to have some level of a backstop for code. So that's one of our core protocols. It's exactly what you're mentioning. I don't want to get too far into it, but that's exactly what's needed. Yeah, to make this, to create real solutions with this, with a backstop. Yeah. So.
I just want to make sure no one interpreted what I was saying as there would be no need for lawyers.
No,
and there'll be no need for bad lawyers. And to what Wulf said is, this is really more of a social revolution than it is technology, because it requires you to do more work up front, whereas bad lawyers just want to push you into a deal, and then, because they make money coming and going, right? So if it falls apart, they make money on the front end and the back end. Imagine you were doing business with our president. He would form a company, and you would sell him 10,000 doorknobs for his hotel, and then you would deliver the product. He would then bankrupt that company, and he would give you, 1/10 of 1 penny for each of those. But if you had a smart contract, you would not send the doorknobs until the president sent to that smart contract the amount of money you agreed to pay. So it has the ability to level the playing field, I think, between the little guy and the big guy. So
yeah.
It's
and I wasn't alluding that attorneys are gone. Attorneys are going to be very, very troubled in the residential real estate world. But you're right, Wulf and John, is that the real estate attorney may be dying a little bit, but the other aspects of it, we do have to have a backstop. We have to, even though it's code, we still have to determine what the code says. It gets into the level of can someone do coding without first talking to an attorney before releasing it, because in Illinois, if you're not an attorney, you can't draft a contract for a third party. So it's very, very, very intriguing. That's probably the strangest part of this.
That's exactly right. But the question is, how do you coordinate that human behavior in a fully decentralized way? That's what Smarter does right now. So yeah, I really appreciate what you're saying. Yeah. So that's another core protocol that we're working on. Exactly right what you're saying.
Yeah, that's why I got into the space, was to challenge people who thought that blockchain means that we don't need a public record anymore, or humans in the process. So I agree, I challenged that from the very beginning. That's what got me into this. Ultimately, at the end of every one of these computers is a human, and there may still be legal action after the doorknob contract, but hey, at least you got your money and you can stay in business and actually hire your lawyer to defend you at that point. If you send the 10,000 doorknobs and you didn't get paid, now not only are you out the good, you don't even have the money to defend yourself in the court of law. So that's the kind of stuff that decentralizes power, really, and it empowers people who may not be able to take these big risks of not getting paid.
So that question was a great segue into really where I was going to go with next, around key challenges. So it really kind of gets to the core of what just when you're writing code, which tends to be very logical, but the world isn't always a logical place, right? It can sometimes be irrational. So transferring that concept to smart contracts, what other key challenges do you guys see around smart contracts as we kind of go forward here?
I think we're over, right?
It's been good. We didn't want to interrupt.
Oh yeah. We don't want to interfere with
Oh,
nice people.
okay.
Yeah.
Wow, that was fast.
No, yeah, that was quick. Sorry, I was told we had till quarter till. Is that wrong?
All right.
Okay.
We started late, yeah.
Got it. So key challenges.
Jurisdictional reach. How do you, so people get mad at me for saying this, but there is a core incompatibility between the evolution of smart contracting in a fully decentralized setting and our existing legal infrastructure. So if these nodes around the world are all together creating the smart contract, how is the existing legal infrastructure exercising in personam jurisdiction, which is what we call to haul somebody in, as lawyers, to get somebody into court, right? So how's the government exercising control over this individual and force them into court in a certain contract dispute? You can say, yes, technically, legally, there's always in personam jurisdiction, because somewhere in the world, this person that wrote the code and is on the other side of this contract, that is otherwise in cyberspace, only exists in sort of virtual spaces, that person still exists somewhere. So the court can still technically exercise in personam jurisdiction over this person. Practically, that is near impossible. Now, a lot of lobbyists in Washington, they're getting really geared up over this, right? Because what that would mean, if I'm right, what that would mean is that we have to fundamentally rethink the way we exercise jurisdiction in a decentralized commerce context. Right? So all these contracts, they are all spread out by code around the world. So currently, what is possible, if the stakes are high enough in a smart contract, the counterparties can hire witnesses, can hire experts to trace where the money went, what went wrong in a given contract, and try to identify the counterparties that are otherwise anonymous in these smart contracts. If you throw enough money at it, you can do it today. But, there's a big but. If and when this grows and the amounts get smaller, and you can't enforce it because it's not worth spending the money to find these counterparties, you practically can no longer enforce these contracts. That means there's a level of incompatibility with our existing legal system that people shy away from. Well, there's no way that you can continue to shy away from this as this grows, as these contracts proliferate, as new smart cities and so forth are being built based on this technology. So I could go on. Sorry, I've written 3 articles about this, so I apologize. So there's a real core problem that we need to solve in terms of the legal enforcement of those contracts.
The enforcement, that's a great point.
Yeah.
How about from your perspective?
Yeah, I was in the CISO roundtable, and the question was asked, have you spent enough money on cybersecurity? And I thought, from the government standpoint, I would change that question. Haven't you spent enough money on cybersecurity? And it goes to the actual real major problem, and Wulf covered the legal part, which is correct. So I'm going to cover just the technological part, which is the internet is fundamentally broken in the way that we identify and spend so much time identifying who we're dealing with. So public and private sector need to say, you know what, criminals are always 2 to 5 to 10 years ahead of us. We need a détente. We need to join together in a public-private partnership to rebuild this Web 3.0, if you want to call it that, based around digital identity issued by the government. So we can authenticate ourselves by our facial recognition and our voices, things that cannot be separated from us and are more accurate than, me looking at somebody and their ID. So, we need just a completely new way of doing that. Once we know who we're dealing with, it becomes easier to enforce when needed, while adding extra privacy as well if you do it right. And it has to be done right so it doesn't turn into a social credit system where you're tracked and monitored everywhere. In fact, it should be the opposite. But when the very chips that go into a server can be hijacked in a factory and placed with chips on there that you wouldn't even know, that's a social problem, right? That's something that we can solve, and that's really scary stuff. And there's some headlines about using blockchain to authenticate, down to the microprocessor level. That's probably what's going to be needed. But also just some smarter social policies. We need to know which of our grandma's 9 Facebook accounts is really her, and we need to start paying for things like email. If you paid 1/100th of a penny for every email you sent, but it meant no spam. So we got to get off this, buy at the cheapest products and free services. So crypto is about incentivizing and being able to do micropayments. So, put that all together and you've got the ingredients for a better internet that, can last 10, 20 years.
So going back to the legal side of things, and I'm not mad at you for what you said. It was all right. The coolest thing that I saw is I started playing around, obviously, with some of the major exchanges and seeing what they did on the coin side. But I went to a little decentralized app, and I've been on it for a while. It's called BISQ. It was BISQ. Coolest thing. So it was straight decentralized. It was like, I have 2 Bitcoin to sell, and at that time it was a little bit of money. So we went ahead and said, okay, I'm going to trade it. And someone says, okay, I want to buy 2, but I want to buy it at this price. And then someone says, oh, I want to buy it at this price. So then you conduct the transaction. But the coolest thing I saw is that they had an arbitration provision. So if you get involved in this transaction, you put your, let's say, $1,000 worth of Bitcoin in there, into the escrow or the smart contract, and then they put their coin in, and it gets confirmed and all the other good stuff. But you also have to deposit money in for purposes of the arbitration. So if in fact someone breaches or someone didn't do something right or code was written wrong or whatever the case may be, then the dispute would result in an independent arbitrator that would decide whether they're right or wrong. And within that contract, and I want to talk to Wulf about this in great detail later, but within the code, it was all the provisions. Is this going to be, and I don't know how deep they got because I didn't read the arbitration provision yet, but what happened is it said something clear like, okay, here are the things we can solve without an independent arbitrator. Document analysis. Did it hit these particular evidence? And we've got the blockchain, right, to identify what actually happened in the transaction. And then you have another one. So if you want to pay more, you can go to and argue this in front of an independent party. I mean, we've got Zoom, we've got Skype, we've got every other means of communication. So there are mechanisms, and those things are being built now. At least they're being built in my head. So anyway, those are some of the things that you'll be seeing on the smart contract side, and that's really where we're going to be.
Great. Are we at time at this point?
Yeah.
Sounds like?
You got to be on time.
Okay. Well, I think that's it then.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.